In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills and thick woods, there was a beautiful lake that everyone loved. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, peaceful spot where people could go to relax. For years, families would pack up sandwiches and head down to the water on weekends. Kids splashed around in the shallows while their parents sat under trees, chatting or reading books. Fishermen cast their lines early in the morning, hoping for a big catch. And couples often walked along the edge of the lake at sunset, enjoying the calm. One woman who visited this place regularly lived nearby. She had moved into her small house 5 years earlier, looking for a fresh start after some tough times. Life wasn't easy for her. She worked long hours just to make ends meet and raise her young son alone. But the lake gave her something priceless, a break from all the stress. Every weekend, rain or shine, they'd grab their old picnic blanket and spend hours by the water. Her son loved chasing butterflies near the reeds, skipping stones across the surface, and sometimes even trying, and failing, to teach the ducks how to fetch sticks. Those moments became precious memories for both of them. But then, one sunny afternoon, everything changed. Heavy machines rolled in, and workers began putting up a tall iron fence around the entire lake. Bright orange cones dotted the area, and signs popped up everywhere saying things like private property and no trespassing. The once open shoreline suddenly felt locked away, out of reach. People were confused and angry. What happened? How could something that belonged to everyone now be off limits? It turned out that the local homeowners association, or HOA, as everyone called it, had decided to take control of the lake. They said they wanted to protect it because too many visitors might harm the environment. But most folks didn't buy that explanation. Rumors started flying around town. Some whispered that the HOA planned to charge hefty fees for access, turning the lake into a private club only rich people could afford. Others thought maybe developers were eyeing the land for expensive vacation homes. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: the lake no longer belonged to the community. For the woman, this news hit hard. Growing up, she used to come here with her own parents. Now, seeing the gate shut tight made her feel like someone had stolen a part of her childhood and her son's future fun. Sure, the HOA promised keys to the gate for members, but those came with sky-high membership costs that most families couldn't afford. So instead of laughter and happy chatter echoing off the water, silence settled over the lake. Even the ducks seemed quieter. The woman tried not to let bitterness creep in, but it was hard. Every time she drove past the fenced-off lake, her chest tightened. She wondered if anyone else cared enough to do something about it. After all, standing up to the HOA wasn't exactly easy. They had money, influence, and lawyers. Who would dare challenge them? Still, the thought nagged at her. This wasn't fair. Why should ordinary people lose access to such a beautiful place just because someone decided to slap a price tag on it? One evening, as she tucked her son into bed, he asked, "Why can't we go to the lake anymore?" His voice was soft, almost sad. That question stayed with her long after he fell asleep. Maybe there was a way to fix this. Maybe she could find a loophole, a crack in the system that the HOA hadn't thought of. Determined to try, she started asking questions and doing research. Little did she know, her journey was about to take a surprising turn, one that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in the community. The woman knew she couldn't take on the HOA alone. If she wanted to fight back, she needed answers and allies. So, she started showing up at town hall meetings, sitting quietly in the back at first but eventually speaking up when it was clear no one else would. At these gatherings, the HOA leaders acted confident, almost smug, as if they'd already won. They talked about sustainability and protecting natural resources, using big words that sounded nice but didn't really explain why regular folks were being locked out. But the more she listened, the angrier she got. One night, during a particularly heated meeting, an older man stood up. His voice trembled with frustration as he said, "This lake has been here longer than any of us. It's not yours to take away. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, the woman felt like maybe she wasn't the only one who cared. After the meeting ended, she approached the man to thank him for speaking out. He introduced himself and told her he'd lived in the area his whole life. "If you're serious about fighting this," he said, "you need to dig deeper. Find out what they're hiding." That conversation lit a fire under her. Over the next few weeks, she spent every spare moment researching. She went through old maps of the lake, legal documents, and property records from the county office. It wasn't easy. Some files were dusty and hard to read, while others required jumping through bureaucratic hoops just to access. But slowly, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. And then, late one night, she stumbled upon something surprising: the HOA didn't actually own the entire lakefront. There was a tiny sliver of land along the edge of the water, a narrow strip barely wide enough for a path that still belonged to someone else. This parcel had somehow slipped through the cracks during the HOA's land grab. Its owner was an elderly man who lived in a small cabin hidden deep in the woods. Most people in town didn't even know he existed. He kept to himself and rarely ventured beyond his front porch. But according to public records, this piece of land gave him direct access to the lake, and thanks to its location, it also happened to bypass the new fence entirely. The next day, armed with nothing but determination and a map printed from the internet, the woman set out to find him. She drove down winding dirt roads until she reached a clearing where a weathered wooden cabin sat surrounded by tall pines. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and a mangy dog lounged on the steps. As she knocked on the door, she half expected no one to answer. But after a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a grizzled man with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly, clearly unimpressed by her sudden appearance. She took a deep breath and explained everything: the fence, the HOA's restrictions, and how much the lake meant to her and her son. Then she showed him the map, pointing out the little strip of land that technically belonged to him. "I think you might hold the key to keeping the lake accessible," she said carefully. "If we work together, we could give people a way back in." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed and leaned against the doorframe. "Listen," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I don't care about those suits or their fancy rules. I've been here longer than any of them, and I've never needed their permission to fish or walk down to the water. But if you're willing to put in the effort, maybe we can figure something out." His words gave her hope, but she knew this was just the beginning. Buying the property wouldn't be cheap, and convincing him to sell wouldn't be easy either. Still, she left the cabin feeling optimistic for the first time in months. There was a chance, a real chance, to turn things around. All she had to do was seize it. Over the following days, she visited the man several more times, bringing coffee and homemade cookies to break the ice. Slowly, they began to talk not just about the lake, but about life in general. He shared stories about growing up in the area before it became so developed, back when the lake was wild and untouched. She told him about her struggles as a single parent and how much the lake meant to her family. By the end of their conversations, she realized he wasn't just a cranky old man, he was someone who understood loss and resilience, just like her. Eventually, he agreed to consider selling the land. But there was a catch: he insisted that whatever she did with it, she had to keep it open for everyone. "This isn't about money," he said firmly. "It's about doing right by the community. If you can promise me that, we've got a deal." She nodded without hesitation. Keeping the lake accessible had always been her goal, and now she had a partner who believed in the same dream. With his blessing, she started crunching numbers, figuring out how much it would cost to buy the property and make it usable again. It wasn't going to be easy, far from it, but she was ready to fight for what mattered most. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had ever loved that lake. With the elderly man's agreement to sell the land, the woman now faced her biggest challenge yet: finding the money to buy it. The price tag was steep, far beyond what she could comfortably afford on her own. But giving up wasn't an option. Every time she thought about the lake being locked away behind that iron fence, her determination burned brighter. She reminded herself why this mattered, not just for her and her son, but for everyone who had ever found joy or peace by the water. Her first step was to sit down with a calculator and a notebook. She mapped out her finances, cutting corners wherever she could. Groceries became cheaper, nights out with friends turned into movie nights at home. She picked up extra shifts at work, sometimes staying late into the evening even when her feet ached and her eyes felt heavy. Her son noticed the change, of course. One night, as they ate dinner together, he asked, "Are you tired because of the lake?" His innocent question caught her off guard, but she smiled and nodded. "Yeah, buddy," she said softly. "But it'll be worth it." Word began to spread around town about what she was trying to do. At first, people were skeptical. After all, taking on the HOA sounded impossible. But as more details emerged about the tiny strip of land, the elderly man's willingness to help, and her relentless drive, a few brave souls stepped forward to offer support. A neighbor stopped her one afternoon while she was mowing her lawn. "You're really doing this, huh?" he asked, his tone curious but respectful. When she nodded, he grinned and said, "Count me in. I'll donate whatever I can." That conversation sparked something unexpected. Over the next few weeks, donations trickled in from all over the community. Some gave small amounts, $10 here, $20 there, while others contributed larger sums. One local business owner even held a charity car wash, donating all proceeds to the cause. The woman was overwhelmed by the generosity, though she still worried it wouldn't be enough. To fill the gap, she decided to launch an online crowdfunding campaign. With the help of a tech-savvy friend, she created a simple page explaining the situation and sharing photos of the lake. The response was incredible. Strangers from neighboring towns started chipping in, inspired by her story. Messages poured in, offering encouragement and gratitude. Finally, after months of hard work and sacrifice, she had enough money to make an offer on the land. The day she signed the papers, her hands shook as she held the pen. This was at the moment everything changed. As she walked away from the lawyer's office clutching the deed, she felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a touch of disbelief. Somehow, against all odds, she'd done it. The lake wasn't completely lost after all. The next step was turning the neglected strip of land into something usable. It wasn't much to look at, just a patch of dirt overrun with weeds and brambles, but she saw its potential. On weekends, volunteers showed up to help clear the area. Families brought rakes and shovels, teenagers dragged fallen branches to a bonfire pile, and kids ran around collecting rocks to line the edges of the new path. Someone donated gravel to create a makeshift driveway, while another person built a wooden sign that read, "Welcome to the lake." Slowly but surely, the space transformed. One of the most exciting discoveries came when the elderly man handed her a rusty old key. "This opens the original gate," he explained. "It's been sitting in my drawer for years. Figured it might come in handy someday." That key turned out to be a game changer. While the HOA controlled most of the gates around the lake, this particular entrance predated their ownership. Legally, they couldn't block access to it without violating property rights. For the first time in months, people could walk freely to the water without needing permission or paying dues. News of the reopened pathway spread quickly. Neighbors who hadn't visited the lake in ages returned, marveling at how alive it felt again. Kids laughed as they skipped stones, couples strolled hand in hand along the shore, and fishermen cast their lines once more. The woman stood back, watching it all unfold, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't perfect, there was still no beach or fancy amenities, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that the lake was open, welcoming, and free. Of course, not everyone was happy about it. The HOA leadership caught wind of what was happening and immediately sent a letter demanding she close the entrance. They claimed her actions violated zoning laws and threatened legal action if she didn't comply. Reading their stern words made her stomach churn, but she refused to let fear take over. She'd come too far to back down now. Instead, she hired a lawyer using leftover funds from the crowdfunding campaign. Together, they drafted a response, pointing out that her property rights superseded the HOA's restrictions. The battle wasn't over, but she was ready to fight. Despite the looming threat, life around the lake continued. People thanked her every chance they got, calling her a hero and praising her courage. She always shrugged off the compliments, insisting she was just doing what anyone else would have done. But deep down, she knew this victory meant more than regaining access to the water. It was proof that ordinary people could stand up to power and win. And every time she watched her son toss a stick into the lake for the dog to chase, she knew it had all been worth it. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final hearing. People from all over town had shown up to support the woman who had fought so hard to keep the lake open. Some brought their kids, others wore shirts with slogans like "Save Our Lake" written in bold letters. Even the elderly man who had sold her the land came, leaning on a cane but standing tall. The air buzzed with nervous energy as everyone waited for the judge's decision. This wasn't just about one person anymore, it was about hope, fairness, and the idea that sometimes, ordinary people could make a difference. When the judge finally entered the room, the crowd fell silent. He shuffled through papers, his face unreadable, before clearing his throat to speak. After reviewing the evidence presented, he began slowly, "This court finds in favor of the defendant." For a moment, no one moved. Then, cheers erupted loud enough to echo off the walls. The woman sat frozen in her seat, clutching the edge of the table as tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't let herself believe they'd win until this exact second. Now, it felt surreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Outside the courthouse, reporters jotted down notes while neighbors hugged each other, celebrating the victory. Someone handed her a bouquet of wild flowers, saying, "You did it. You saved us all." Her son tugged at her sleeve, grinning ear to ear. "Does this mean we can always go to the lake now?" he asked. She nodded, pulling him close. "Yes, buddy. Always." But winning the case was only part of the story. With the legal battle behind her, the woman turned her attention to improving the entrance she'd worked so hard to create. Volunteers poured in from every corner of the community, eager to pitch in. A local carpenter built picnic tables using donated wood. Gardeners planted flowers and shrubs along the path, adding splashes of color to the once barren landscape. Kids painted cheerful murals on the wooden sign, turning it into a work of art. Someone even installed a small bulletin board where visitors could leave messages or share photos of their time at the lake. The transformation was remarkable. What had started as a narrow dirt path became a vibrant gathering spot, a place where people could connect with nature and each other. Families came back week after week, making memories that would last a lifetime. Fishermen returned to their favorite spots, swapping stories of big catches and near misses. Couples strolled along the shore, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was more than just a lake, it was a symbol of resilience, unity, and what could be achieved when people stood together. Meanwhile, the HOA struggled to recover from the fallout. Their reputation had taken a hit not just locally, but across neighboring communities too. News outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on their heavy-handed tactics. Membership numbers plummeted as residents opted out of paying dues, unwilling to support an organization that had tried to shut them out of something so precious. Eventually, the HOA leadership had no choice but to loosen their grip. They reopened parts of the lake to non-members, lowering fees and introducing programs aimed at repairing trust. While some remained skeptical, others saw it as a step in the right direction. For the woman, the experience changed her in ways she never expected. Before this fight, she'd been content living quietly, keeping her head down and focusing on getting by. But now, she realized how much power there was in speaking up for yourself, your family, and your community. Strangers often stopped her in the grocery store or at school events to thank her for what she'd done. "You inspired us," one woman told her during a PTA meeting. "If you can take on the HOA, maybe I can tackle things I've been afraid of too." She didn't see herself as a hero, though. To her, the real heroes were the volunteers who showed up to help, the donors who gave what they could, and the neighbors who refused to stay silent. Together, they proved that change was possible even when it seemed impossible. And while she knew life wouldn't always be easy, she also knew she'd carry the lessons she learned forever: perseverance, courage, and the belief that one person really could make a difference. As the seasons changed, the lake continued to thrive. In spring, cherry blossoms bloomed along the shoreline, scattering pink petals onto the water. Summers brought laughter and splashing, while autumns painted the trees in fiery reds and golds. Even winters had their charm, with frost-covered branches framing the icy surface. Through it all, the woman kept coming back, watching her son grow older with each passing year. He was learning to fish now, thanks to tips from the old-timers who still frequented the lake. One evening, as they sat side by side skipping stones, he looked up at her and said, "Mom, do you think we'll ever lose this place again?" She smiled, ruffling his hair. "Not if I have anything to say about it." In the end, it wasn't just about the lake. It was about standing up for what mattered, fighting for what was fair, and reminding everyone that some things like fresh air, clean water, and shared spaces belonged to all of us. And as long as there were people willing to protect those ideals, the lake would remain a haven for generations to come.